thank you all for being here. I would thank Deb, and I will thank Deb, even though she's not here. Deb has been really instrumental for me in understanding how to look at and speak of and write about images. Ellen Toscano, you know how much you mean to me. Ellen has been my partner in crime during many trips to Italy for research. So I feel like a lot of the people I've been in conversation with over the years, Alessandra, Gunja, Awam, Marco, it's wonderful to see them and to see all of you. I'm speaking to you after just a few days of being back from Palestine. And my thoughts are partly in that country, but also thinking about the ways that writing and art and the way we speak, the way that language is an act of remembrance as much as it is an act of resistance, and the acts of resurrection that we do through our work. I'm particularly honored and very humbled to be speaking with Canisia Lubrin and Beata. Umubyeyi, Mairesse is the French one that I'm not sure if my accent is good, but I have been, and Kaiama Glover, who is racing here right from the airport because her flight was canceled because a bird flew into the plane at one point. So it was canceled. Now she's on her way here on another flight, so she will dash in. And I have been reading their works both before this trip that I made and over the last several weeks. What strikes me in all of their works is this insistence on reckoning with history, reckoning with the narratives that have been passed down about us, about our stories, but reckoning with the stories we tell ourselves about each other, about the many different kinds of diasporic experiences that exist within the word black and blackness that I think we will begin to address today. I want us all, as we're having this conversation, to also think about the theme that we are here under, which is enduring blackness. And I really want to push against that and begin to complicate what it means to endure and the place of endurance for an artist, the place of endurance, if there is a place, when we are required to make imaginative leaps in the way that we live and in the way that we exist and create. So I want to open that discussion a little bit later. We're going to begin with Beata and Canisia, and then move to Kaiama. I hope that you have read their bios if you haven't already, but please understand that I am in the presence of some incredible writers and thinkers, incredible creators. It's my honor to speak to each of you, and I really look forward to the discussion that's about to follow. I will open it up a bit later towards the end for some questions. But for now, I would like to begin with Beata.
Thank you very much, MAAZA. Thanks for inviting me, and also thanks to all the people who made this happen. I'm really grateful and really happy to be here. I just wanted to tell the audience that I'm going to read a piece from French because it's important that we also have some French presentation in this place. So if you need headphones for the translation, this is the moment. So now I'm going to switch to French. Sur le sujet d'aujourd'hui, je vais me proposer de partager avec vous certains éléments de mon expérience d'écrivaine originaire du Rwanda, vivant et publiant en France. Je suis l'auteur de 2 recueils de nouvelles, de 2 romans et d'un recueil de poésie en prose. Et je suis en train de... L'année prochaine va paraître mon premier texte de non-fiction littéraire. Et c'est notamment en travaillant sur ce texte-là qu'il y a certaines questions qui me sont apparues, qui sont vraiment en concordance avec ce dont on va parler aujourd'hui. Je vais vous le raconter. J'ai appris de mes années de militantisme dans le monde de la santé communautaire qu'il est toujours important de dire d'où on parle et donc de vous dire quel est le cheminement qui m'a amenée à l'écriture. D'abord, je vais vous dire quelle est mon expérience raciale, parce que c'est vrai que hier, il y avait une expérience raciale qui était assez homogène, qui était celle des Noirs américains. Moi, je suis métisse. Je suis née d'une maman noire et d'un père blanc en Afrique subsaharienne. Mais ma maman noire m'a élevée seule. Donc j'ai grandi dans une famille complètement noire, mais avec cette peau-là. Et ça, je pense que ça crée une expérience particulière. Est-ce que je parle trop vite? Ça va, vous me dites. Dans la sphère publique où j'évoluais au Rwanda, ma peau claire faisait penser aux gens, faisait dire aux gens que j'étais blanche. Et ça, c'est aussi assez particulier. Et être blanche, pour eux, ça laissait croire que je faisais partie d'un monde privilégié, un monde que les gens enviaient. Ce qui n'était pas le cas parce que je venais d'une classe moyenne pas du tout aisée. Mais la société, donc ma première expérience de vie jusqu'à mes 15 ans, c'était dans un monde majoritairement noir avec une société qui me renvoyait à un monde qui était l'Europe que je ne connaissais pas du tout, dans lequel je n'avais jamais mis les pieds. En 1994, j'avais 15 ans, arrive le génocide contre les Tutsis au Rwanda, je survis à ce génocide, j'arrive en France. Et là, le regard des gens change complètement. C'est-à-dire qu'on me dit, désormais, tu es noire. Alors comme j'ai les cheveux lisses et ce visage-là, parfois aussi on me prend pour une arabe en France. Et en tant qu'écrivaine, c'est une expérience très intéressante de voir comment les gens vous voient. Et que parfois on me prend pour une antillaise, parfois on me prend pour une arabe, parfois on comprend que je suis africaine subsaharienne. Et tout ça, ça fait quand même une expérience de la race qui est très très différente. Et en France, tout d'un coup, je devenais africaine. On me renvoyait à un continent que l'on considérait comme un pays. Il y a encore vraiment cette idée que l'Afrique est un pays dans beaucoup d'esprits. Un continent dont moi, je ne connaissais qu'un tout petit pays, le Rwanda. Je n'avais jamais été, à part le Burundi, dans d'autres pays. Et on attendait de moi presque que je symbolise l'Afrique. Donc il m'a fallu, à 15 ans, apprivoiser ces différentes identités pour comprendre ce que signifiait être noire dans le regard des gens et pouvoir, à un moment donné, me construire mon identité personnelle. Et à ce moment-là, c'est le moment où j'ai découvert les littératures afro-caribéennes, que je ne lisais pas du tout au Rwanda. J'étais dans une école belge et on me faisait lire des auteurs français uniquement. Je n'avais jamais lu aucun auteur africain ou caribéen avant d'arriver en France. C'est aussi une expérience particulière. Moi, je n'avais pas prévu d'être écrivaine, pas du tout. Je n'ai commencé à écrire qu'à 30 ans passés, donc assez tard. Avec l'idée, il y avait l'artiste dans le panel précédent qui disait qu'elle était allée à la bibliothèque et qu'il n'y avait aucun livre sur les musiciens noirs. Alors, moi, là d'où j'écris, il y avait vraiment cette idée que je cite souvent d'ailleurs de Toni Morrison qui disait « S'il y a un livre que tu voudrais lire et que tu ne le trouves pas dans la bibliothèque, à la librairie, écris-le ». Il y avait des livres qui sortaient sur le génocide contre les Tutsis du Rwanda. Il y avait des livres qui étaient écrits par des journalistes occidentaux, par des chercheurs et des chercheuses occidentaux. Il y a eu assez rapidement une expérience qui était celle de Fest Africa, qui a été un groupe d'écrivains africains dans les années 98-99 qui sont allés au Rwanda. Parce qu'il s'était passé au moment du génocide, c'est que c'est uniquement l'Occident qui a parlé de ce qui se passait au Rwanda. Les intellectuels africains n'en avaient pas parlé, ou très peu. Et donc il y a eu ce projet qui venait de France, avec toute l'ambiguïté de fait que la France avait quand même eu un rôle de complicité avec le pouvoir génocidaire, mais qui a dit on emmène des écrivains africains, francophones, au Rwanda et ils vont écrire dessus. Et puis il y a eu les débuts de les textes écrits par des survivantes et des survivants comme moi, mais qui étaient des témoignages. Et donc moi je lisais tout ça, mais quelque part c'était des textes qui parlaient surtout des tueries du printemps 94, mais assez peu de l'expérience de l'après, de l'expérience de qu'est-ce que c'est qu'être un survivant ou une survivante. Notre intimité, nos histoires de famille, nos traumatismes, je ne le trouvais pas dans les livres. Et donc, c'est comme ça que j'ai commencé à écrire. Il n'y avait pas non plus de fiction écrite par les rescapés. Et moi, j'ai fait le choix dès le départ d'écrire de la fiction. Parce que j'avais appris de mon expérience de lectrice combien la fiction pouvait toucher un large public. Moi, quand je suis arrivée, donc j'ai lu les textes de fiction des auteurs afro-caribéens, mais j'ai aussi lu des textes, témoignages ou fiction des survivants de la Shoah pour comprendre qu'est-ce que c'est qu'être un survivant de génocide. Donc je connaissais cette force et ce pouvoir de la littérature. Et j'avais aussi compris que les gens autour de moi, qui étaient très accueillants, c'était une époque où la France était encore très accueillante. Elle est encore, en tout cas dans le cœur de certaines personnes, mais pas en tant que pays, je pense. Les gens étaient très accueillants, mais les gens n'étaient pas très accueillants par rapport à mes nouvelles, à mes histoires, à ce que je pouvais témoigner. Il y avait une sorte de peur vraiment de cette violence que je pouvais apporter. Donc je me suis tue et je me suis dit, je le ferai, je parlerai à travers la littérature. Au départ, d'ailleurs, j'ai fait le choix d'écrire des nouvelles, alors qu'en France, si on veut vraiment faire de la vraie littérature, il faut écrire un roman. Les nouvelles ne sont pas très considérées, en tout cas les nouvelles contemporaines. Mais pour moi, écrire des nouvelles, c'était une façon de dessiner une sorte de mosaïque de ma génération. Avoir une multiplicité de voix, la diversité des expériences vis-à-vis de cet événement était important. Pourquoi ? Parce qu'il s'agissait de revendiquer la complexité, de dire, vous avez toujours voulu que nous simplifier, nous, les Rwandais notamment, parce que cette histoire de Hutu et de Tutsi est une histoire coloniale qui a été faite par les Belges, qui n'ont pas pris la peine de comprendre la société rwandaise très complexe, qui se sont focalisés sur juste la subdivision Hutu et Tutsi, les agriculteurs, les éleveurs, qui en ont fait des ethnies, ce qu'elles n'étaient pas. Les Hutus et les Tutsis ont la même langue, la même culture, la même religion. Donc c'est vraiment parce qu'on a été caricaturés par les autres, par les colons, qu'on s'est retrouvés un siècle après avec un génocide. C'est ça l'origine quelque part. C'est cette polarisation de la société, cette racialisation de la société. Donc moi, dans mon écriture, il y a vraiment l'idée de on récupère la complexité. Vous voulez lire quelque chose de basique et de simple sur l'Afrique? Alors, ne me lisez pas. Et le recueil de nouvelles, c'est aussi l'idée de je choisis une forme qui permet de dire plein de vies différentes, de plein de points de vue différents de la même histoire. Mais la réception de ce premier livre m'a fait comprendre quelque chose. Donc j'ai 11 nouvelles, 11 histoires de femmes, des femmes noires, il y en a une métisse, il y en a même une religieuse blanche. Les gens venaient me voir en me disant « votre témoignage ». Les gens n'arrivaient pas, la plupart des lecteurs et des lectrices évidemment ont compris que c'était des nouvelles, mais j'avais beaucoup de retours de lecteurs et de lectrices français qui pensaient que tout ce qui était dans ce livre, c'était ma vie. Donc, j'ai découvert, avec cette première expérience, que parce que j'étais une écrivaine africaine, les gens pouvaient se sentir légitimes à nier mon travail de créativité, mon imagination, mon inventivité. Et on avait beau leur mettre devant les yeux 11 histoires différentes. Il voulait en faire une histoire unique de la femme africaine ou la femme rwandaise rescapée. Donc j'ai compris qu'on avait beaucoup de travail. Et il y a vraiment cette idée de... quand on parle, même si c'est écrit roman, c'est écrit nouvelle, c'est écrit fiction, il y a encore des gens ici en France qui vont nous lire comme si c'était des traités d'ethnographie qu'on était en train d'expliquer notre peuple au reste du monde. Ensuite, j'ai écrit un roman. Mon premier roman, Tous tes enfants dispersés, qui a d'ailleurs été traduit en anglais. Et je l'ai écrit après avoir écrit de la poésie, donc je me suis autorisée, contrairement aux nouvelles, une langue beaucoup plus poétique, beaucoup plus flamboyante. Aussi parce que ce n'est pas un roman à proprement parler sur le génocide, c'est un roman qui parle de métissage, de transmission. Il y a ma langue maternelle, le Kinyarwanda, qui est la langue de tous les Rwandais et de toutes les Rwandaises, qui est très présente, même si j'écris en français. Et donc, il a remporté un prix de la francophonie. Et donc, je me suis retrouvée beaucoup dans le monde francophone. Et ça a été une nouvelle expérience. Cette fois-ci, non plus par rapport à l'imaginaire, mais par rapport à la langue. Parce que je me suis rendu compte que pour les écrivains et les écrivaines comme moi, de la diaspora, notre rapport à la langue n'est pas interrogé dans un sens esthétique du langage qu'on va créer en tant qu'auteur, cette patte qui fait de nous, on va lire, on va dire mais ça c'est la langue de MAAZA MENGISTE, c'est la langue... Non, nous, on nous interroge sur pourquoi tu écris en français. Donc, justifier le choix même de la langue. Et j'ai passé des mois à devoir justifier pourquoi je n'écrivais pas dans ma langue maternelle, 2 minutes, mais en français. Et donc, je l'ai fait très gentiment, très calmement. Et à un moment donné, je me dis non, ça suffit. Le français est une langue africaine. Certes, c'est une langue qui est arrivée par la colonisation. C'est, comme disait Kateb Yassine, un butin de guerre, peut-être, mais ma génération, pour moi, aussi bien que l'anglais ou le portugais, pour ça, ce sont nos langues et on ne devrait plus avoir à justifier l'utilisation de ces langues. Alors, est-ce que c'est un complexe des Français qui sont tellement monolingues et de se dire qu'aujourd'hui, en fait, la francophonie, c'est essentiellement des gens qui parlent plusieurs langues et que d'ailleurs, c'est nous qui, aujourd'hui, amenons un souffle nouveau dans le français avec nos imaginaires. Je ne sais pas. Mais en tout cas, ça a été une autre expérience par rapport à la langue. Et puis, je me suis rendu compte aussi qu'il y avait 2 sortes de littérature en français. Je ne sais pas si c'est la même chose dans le monde anglophone. Donc, il y a la littérature francophone et la littérature... Oui, comme ça, c'est mieux. Pardon. Et là, vous m'entendez? Ah, mais il fallait me le dire depuis le départ. Ah, je n'avais pas vu. Donc, la littérature en français, la littérature francophone. Je pense que les gens qui sont du monde francophone savent qu'il y a une sorte de hiérarchie entre les deux. La littérature française, produite par les auteurs vraiment français, qui est auréolée d'une légitimité sans conteste, qui a une longue histoire, qui se voit comme universelle. Ça, on pourra parler de cette notion d'universalité à la française, qui est très lourde. Et puis, d'autre côté, la littérature francophone, c'est-à-dire tous les autres qui écrivent en français, et qui est folklorique, essentialisée. Voilà.
Merci, Beata. Merci. Thank you so much. I'd like to ask you a quick question before we get to Canisia. One of the things you mentioned in your talk was that the way that the story of Rwanda during the genocide was framed by Westerners compared to your own experience of that moment, I think showed a gap in real contextualizing and complicating of that situation. And you mentioned that really this is also about language and narrative. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that.
First of all, there is the words. Words are very important. And for example, the fact that what happened in Rwanda was named the Rwandan genocide is kind of problematic, because you don't say about the genocide of the Jews that it is the European genocide. So there is a way of not understanding who killed who, and so because the narrative was at that time that those people have been slaughtering each other for ages, and you don't know what is going on. So it's a refusal to see the situation as something modern, political, but seeing that as like dark, heart of darkness, and so denying. Of course, they accepted that this was genocide. I think they couldn't deny that, but saying it's a Rwandan genocide, it's like, you know, and there is something that I did put at the very beginning of my first book. So it's a quote from Annie Ernaux, who received the Nobel Prize last year, and this is something that she said in a very famous novel of her called Les Années. I don't know if I have it here, but I can. She wrote about the genocide in Rwanda, and I'm going to say it in French. On avait moins envie de s'intéresser au Rwanda, faute de distinguer qui des Hutus et des Tutsis étaient les bons et les méchants. Depuis toujours, penser à l'Afrique remplissait de torpeur. Il était tacitement admis que c'était un lieu avec des potentats à château en France, avec de la corruption, etc., etc. Et elle termine en disant « C'était le continent décourageant ». So, what's going on there in Africa?
Yeah.
Donc, it was really important and when I read that, I love Annie Ernaux. For me, she was really fundamental for understanding something of another part of my life, that being a transfuge social, so coming from a poor neighborhood and going in a rich neighborhood. But then I realized, so the problem is not Annie Ernaux. She really puts the words on how France and French people, European people saw this history, but the way they see Africa in general.
Yeah.
We don't want to understand.
Right.
It's too complicated.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's really important to have that the work on the words and put the right words on the situation, and also say how complex our story is, as for everybody else in the world.
Thank you. That's fantastic. It makes me think of actually the work that Canisia has been doing for a number of years, and most recently in her new book that will be coming out next year called Code Noir. And I would like Canisia to read this, but maybe Canisia, you can explain a little bit about the origin of Code Noir and read the preface, and then I'd love to ask you a question that continues what Beata has been talking about with this transformation or reckoning with different narratives and language.
Bonjour. Thank you for coming. Merci d'avoir venu avec nous aujourd'hui. It's really lovely to be here. Just, my thanks to everybody who made this a real thing with flesh and blood in a room. So, MAAZA, my thanks to you, and Beata, and Kaiama, who's on her way. Hopefully she'll get here. So Code Noir is a book of short fiction. There's 59 short fictions in the book. And it is based on King Louis XIV's Le Code Noir, which codified 59 articles into law that determined the rules around practicing slavery and so-called how you control free blacks in the French colonial empire. So I take each of those articles and they become somehow oriented in the story that I write. And so I'll just read what I call the opening remarks, because we are in the law, so. The murderers in this draft are those who write the laws, who tell you to prepare for the tragedy of the afternoon, because they have claimed with their black codes every morning of every country on earth. They won't tell you that it is their minister, their president, their physician, their deacon, swept up in another breaking, buried language. All those who will be ridiculed by mid-morning. The murderers must admit you are growing into their fictions, that it is your hello that begins the conjuring. There is only one word for this fiction in the English language, belief, and two in the French, croyance et loi. Okay, there's also la foi, but who's counting? In 5 minutes, a strange order of time that does not involve experience or awareness, only innocence, will begin, and you must be prepared. On another bridge, with a lit match, there's a poet asking, what does it mean to speak as though the world you know is the world? I do not require your belief. If you are here, you know by now that the bankers are useless, though dangerous. The kings are flies. The craven philosophers with some of their poet friends have left for the mountains, and the rest of us, we are somewhat bored with it, all of it, and somewhat overcome. So keep pace with what is about to happen in these pages. If anybody gets to preaching, you point them to the footnotes. If anybody tells you they have the only truth, you use your nose instead. If anybody claims innocence, stop them. If anybody tells you everything is working fine, run. Or do whatever you want. It may be that the world is always tuned to our senses, and we attach ourselves against our best wisdom to everything above the surface of the earth. This whole thing, it is all a setup, as likely as homecoming is to the homeless. What else is law? What happens in these pages is a setup in the same way that the cosmos does not select its own plot, its own afterlives of universes and planets, in the same way that the gods are as small as the people who invent them. I sometimes went flying with a winged assassin. We flew across the continents, met gods with wrecked noses and infant deities with erections, all framed in the rooms of men at arms. And we sometimes named the things against which we thrash out our living. Now, in our boiling world, the perspective of the droned assassin forms part of the shifting earth of this writing. What other way to live on this side of the history you will encounter here, when that king and the ones before and after him wrote his codes? He could not fathom how the mountains would be filled with cowardly philosophers. I am not the first to tell you this, but I must say it here. This is the world. This is the world you don't know, you know. Merci. Thank you.
2024. The book is coming out. Beata's book All Our Children Scattered is available now, just FYI for everyone. Canisia, I was struck when reading your book about your process in having the Code Noir, and then moving from that to these pieces of writing that is fully and wholly yours in your own language. I'd like to talk to you and ask you about the process, that leap in the imagination that Beata also mentions, whose imagination is more equal than another. Can you talk about that process of writing, that imaginative landscape that you had to cross? But I also would like to ask you, and both of you, after you, I'd like Beata to also answer the question that you asked us in this preface, which is, what does it mean to speak as if the world you know is the world?
Great, thank you for that. So first, I encountered the codes while doing research for my previous book of poems. And of course, you know, when you do research, so what you end up using is usually a fraction of everything you had to wade through to come out the other end with something cogent. And so, although I did know of the codes, they occupied a damp, dark space in my memory. It was almost as though something had interrupted the impact that encountering the codes had on me that first time. And so when I came upon it, it was like coming upon it freshly all over again. And I thought, oh my God, what I'm doing here in the Dysgraphist, which was my second book, was a book-length poem. I found a very small bit of language for that work. And then it immediately became apparent to me that I was sitting in front of something that would become fiction. And the main reason, act normal. So I knew that I found something that had, it would have a life in fiction. Primarily because, you know, when we think about the law and its processes of codification and what it privileges as logic, it collapses into itself what we think of as morality, as ethics, right? And so when you ask the question about imagination, you know, not all imagination is equal and things like that. That collapsing of the logic of law and the necessity of ethics creates a really warped sense of authority. And it becomes, it gets taken up in these universalizing principles, right? Which we know there's no such thing as the universal, really. When we talk about human beings and values and how they exist in the world. And so I knew that I didn't want to reproduce or replicate the logic of the codes in any way, shape, or form in the stories, because I just want to let the vileness and the sadistic nature of the codes just stand for themselves, because they are their own evidence. And we can see how they sort of have evolved even into current day jurisprudence. You know, various practices of stop and frisk and carding and all of that. They have their origins in those laws, those codes. And so for me, I wanted the imagination, the leap of imagination you're talking about that happened in the stories is actually about privileging the interiority, the consciousness of those characters, the way they think about the world, create brief portraits, a kind of poetics or metaphysics of being. That doesn't necessarily have to answer to the primacy of a certain kind of narrative logic that says you have to explain over and over and over the thing that we already know about how the world moves through language, how language animates who we are in the world, and what these laws actually mean, right? So it's not a crisis of meaning in the laws at all. It's a crisis of morality. It's a crisis of, in fact, the semblances of moral authority and the sort of power to live as a free, full, complex human being. So that's the major thing for me. That leap was about speaking through the interior. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Canisia. Now that Kaiama Glover has heroically made it from the plane, thank you so much, Kaiama. I would like to have you read a short excerpt of your presentation, and then I would like to bring all of you together in a question that connects you all.
Sure. Do I have to? Oh, it's already on. Okay. So first of all, I'm so sorry to miss your presentation, and I'm so just grateful.
It was the bird's fault.
Yeah, and a bird strike. What the actual hell? So leaping into a conversation in medias res, I hope this connects in some way. So I don't know if I've been introduced, but I'm a translator and an academic, a researcher in French-speaking literature, primarily from Haiti. And at some point in my professional life, I started translating the text that I had long been studying. And since then, and it's been exactly 10 years now, translation has become a singularly integral praxis for me, not something so much on the side, but something that I do to understand work and the world. I jumped into my first translation project untrained, unstudied, and guided loosely by a confidence that I knew enough about Haitian literature and was proficient enough in French and in Creole to do a decent job of it. This was mostly true, I think, but since then I've gained a lot more clarity about what translation means, and I've arrived at a few overlapping givens that guide my practice. These may not be every translator's givens, and as such they may be debatable. We might even debate them later here, but for now I just want to briefly lay them out. Given number 1, Blackness matters. Not in the biological sense, of course, but as a construct and inevitable condition of social being. And this is actually a trickier claim than it might seem in the world of translation, because when it comes to works written by racialized authors, there's something of an elephant in the room. Does a Black authored text functionally or ethically require a Black translator? This might surprise you, but I believe the short answer is no. Blackness matters, but it isn't everything. It certainly isn't enough. Sharing a race with the author of a text does not, in and of itself, make a translator more competent to render that text in a target language, no more so than mere proficiency in a source language suffices to make a good translator. The translator's contribution and her talent, if talent there is, are a matter of the intimacies she allows to flow through her. These intimacies might be accessed in part through common racial identification, but that's just a first step. Because in the end, they actually require some distance, some open, unresolved space for curiosity and study, for investment and intention. They require care, carefulness, full of careness. This commitment to care about Blackness, is a matter of responsibility, of accountability. Which brings me to given number 2. Also maybe a bit surprising, but translation is power. Power, ironically, I mean, perhaps especially because of its relative lack of representation within the broader literary institution. On the one hand, it's true, yes, translation makes up a distressingly slim tranche of the market for book publishing, and translated works from non-European cultures are seen as having particularly limited market potential. Still, it would be a mistake to accept that the undeniable paucity of opportunities for translation work amounts to disempowerment. We mustn't lose sight of where our power lies, nor should we too easily cede to the fundamentally colonial institutions that determine how race, how Blackness does or doesn't travel across languages and cultures. Our power as translators resides first and foremost in our choice of what to translate. And in choosing, we must be clear in our intentions. We must have intentions in the first place. In my own work as a translator, being intentional has meant, among else, amplifying voices that the combined forces of xenophobia and racism too often leave languishing in stereotype. A third and a final given I want to mention here, there are many more, but time is short and I was late. Cultural imperialism is also a Black thing. In popular culture especially, there has long been a tendency to flatten singular Black experiences into the US Anglophone Black experience, capital B, capital E. The fact that Blackness has been discussed so openly in the United States, so thoroughly buttressed by a lexicon of explicit terms and positions, and aided by the diffusion of Black American culture worldwide through jazz and hip-hop, this has led to a certain African American cultural hegemony. And that cultural, oops, am I way too fast for you? I'm sorry, I'm still running. Should I start again? Sorry. In the best of times, I speak quickly. I have it also in French, so I could read it in French, but I'll stick to the English more slowly. The fact that Blackness has been discussed so openly in the United States, so thoroughly buttressed by a lexicon of explicit terms and positions, and aided by the diffusion of Black American culture worldwide through jazz and hip-hop, this has led to a certain African American cultural hegemony. And that cultural force can be silencing in a global frame. We allied the differences among Afro-descendant peoples across the globe at our collective peril. We risk leaving ourselves blind to worldviews and perspectives that might be grounds for potent new solidarities. All right. We risk leaving insidious colonial structures in place, insufficiently questioned. Translation, in my view, contests these blind spots. It is a practice of refusal, providing fodder for efforts to put together a puzzle of the Black world that pushes against the hierarchies of the colonial map. Through my translation work, I hope not only to chip away at distorted or unbalanced representations of Blackness in the Anglosphere, but also to cultivate what I've been calling Afro-fluency. To be clear, fluency, as I understand and intend it within the context of translating Blackness, doesn't aspire to transparency or mastery. Afro-fluency doesn't imagine that communication across languages is or should be unfettered. Rather, it calls for creating conditions of relation in the Glissantian sense. It's a prerequisite for conceiving a global ethno-political community capacious enough to accommodate our singularities. It neither fears nor seeks to compromise opacity. Though it encourages recognition of the common experiences of racialized being in this world, it does not require, it resists even, anything that smacks of ethno-conformity. But what Afrofluency does require is a tolerance for discomfort and a commitment to imagining community in ways unfixed and unsettled. Afrofluency resolutely contests the balkanization of the Black world and urges us to trouble the frame of the nation-state and other pernicious avatars of colonialism. Afrofluency is transgressive in its submarine yearning toward borderless connection, but it does not truck in the illusions of perfect conveyance. Submarine, yes, like water, Afrofluency is fluid in the sense of changeable, not rigid, and translation is its most fundamental condition of possibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaiama. I'd like to talk about this. I'd like to ask a brief question about this possibility that you ended with. And I was fascinated in your presentation about the ways that you are very selective in what you choose in translating. And could you talk to us just a little bit more? And I think this is going to, in essence, what I'm asking you echoes this question that I wanted Canisia and Beata to also reckon with. What would it look like if we were to speak? What does it mean to speak as if the world you know is the world? So let's start with you.
I love that question. So choice, the thing that matters, is the most power for the translator. For me in particular, it has to do with the fact that I translate primarily Haitian literature, and the fact of translating Haitian literature as an intervention into a world that has a narrative about Haiti that I want to contest. On the one hand, I see you, Aijin. So the choice being a choice to say no, to refuse certain discourses that circulate more widely than the voices of Haitians themselves. And it's a recognition in my practice of the fact that the colonial enterprise has meant that many Haitians in the Anglophone world, in the United States in particular, don't have access to their cultural patrimony because the vicissitudes of migration have cut them off from francophonie. So they find themselves in positions where the narrative that they hear and have best access to circulates in the pages of the New York Times, when there's an incredibly rich, diverse, and long-standing cultural heritage that's just outside their grasp. And so the English is a bridge, first for me, for a no to the New York Times, and here to communities that should have access to cultural patrimonies that the world that built the New York Times has made inaccessible to them. So I don't know if it's starting from the world I want. It's refusing the world I don't want. So that's something. But yeah, I'll say that for now.
Thank you.
And the New York Times obviously isn't the worst, but it's like the best pretending not to be the worst, which is why I think of it.
Thank you. Beata?
I will answer in French if you don't mind. Moi, je pense que là d'où je parle, j'ai envie de dire, pour citer cette phrase de Césaire, l'heure de nous-mêmes a sonné. On a tellement été, et vraiment l'histoire rwandaise, l'histoire du génocide contre les Tutsis du Rwanda a beaucoup été racontée par d'autres, avec un narratif dans lequel moi et les gens comme moi, c'est-à-dire les survivantes et les survivants, on nous cantonné au rôle de victime qui vient témoigner, mais pas dans la possibilité d'être ceux qui racontent dans la littérature, qui racontent artistiquement. Juste une anecdote, mais je trouve qui est assez parlante. En France, il y a un écrivain, journaliste, qui a beaucoup écrit sur le génocide contre les Tutsis, qui est très connu. Et il y a quelques années, que je ne connais pas personnellement, que je ne connaissais pas. Je devais faire une interview à la radio, et quelqu'un m'a dit qu'il m'a entendu parler, et il a dit, mais ça peut pas être une Rwandaise qui parle comme ça. Et j'ai mis ça sur le... Je me suis dit, ok, pourquoi ? Et il y a quelques temps, vraiment pas longtemps, et je vais vous expliquer la connexion. Ça peut paraître anecdotique, mais ça parle d'un état d'esprit. J'étais dans un festival littéraire et une dame vient me voir après avoir lu mon roman, et elle me dit « Ah, j'ai beaucoup aimé, mais par contre, j'ai été surprise par la langue. » Et je dis « Pourquoi ?» Elle me dit « Ça ne ressemble pas à la langue de... » Et là, elle cite ce fameux écrivain français journaliste. Alors je lui dis, mais vous savez que ce monsieur ne parle pas le Kinyarwanda, qu'il passe par des traducteurs pour interroger les survivants ou les Rwandais dont il parle, en ne citant jamais les traducteurs d'ailleurs. Et moi, un jour, la seule fois où je l'ai rencontré, je lui ai confronté, je lui ai dit, mais c'est très bien votre travail, mais pourquoi vous ne parlez jamais du fait que la langue des gens, c'est pas la langue que vous parlez et que vous êtes passé par des traducteurs et qu'ils ont un rôle important, qui vous ont fait une sorte de charité aussi en vous introduisant dans cette langue. Et donc, c'est vraiment l'idée qu'il y a des gens qui ont décidé ailleurs, ce qu'on appelle ici des spécialistes de l'Afrique, j'ai toujours trouvé ça incroyable, qui décident comment je suis censée être, comment je suis censée parler. Ça me fait penser à cette... dans le livre Près de la mer de Abdulrazak Gourna, quelqu'un qui dit en fait on va faire venir un spécialiste qui sait mieux que moi, qui connaît mieux que moi mon pays, qui sait mieux que moi ce qui s'est passé et qui va pouvoir m'expliquer à moi-même. Donc le monde dont je veux parler, dont nous parlons maintenant, c'est notre monde, mais pas à travers le regard de ceux qui sont censés le connaître, mais de l'intérieur, avec nos langues. Et aussi, voilà, enfin, toute la question des photos, dont je ne sais pas si on aura le temps de parler, mais qui nous raconte? Et à quel moment est-ce qu'on dit, OK, peut-être que j'ai un autre narratif à proposer?
Very quickly. So the line that you quoted, what is it to speak as though the world you know is the world, I just want to say that comes out of Dion Brand, the great Dion Brand's masterful nomenclature, which is a new and collected work that came out last year. And so the poet I reference in the opening remarks is Dion Brand on a bridge, speaking those words with a lit match. And so the insistence on to speak as though the world you know is the world, I want to draw attention to speak and know. Because language, in all of its permutations, is more than mere expression or the sort of functional need to communicate. It's deep wells of knowledge, deep wells of being. And I think about, as someone who was from the Caribbean, who comes from a small island, and we have two languages, Creole, the French Creole, and English, and just sitting with the necessity of my ancestors who were sold into slavery and essentially invented, the very first thing they invented was language, because you need that in order to exist and to be in the world. And it's really about knowing, and it's about being and meaning, and how we make lives, right? So, but for me, it's really about the material consequences of all of those things, right? So it's not cerebral or merely theoretical, right? It's about materially what happens. What is that? What happens in the sort of initiation of speaking, knowing, that then puts us at a sort of impasse, right? With the forces that pretend that their way of knowing is what should conscribe the entire world.
I will just close this out by speaking of what I'm thinking about, having heard all of this. I think you've heard three brilliant speakers contending with the aftermaths of various violences, and trying to, and actually developing their own intimate language to begin to speak of this aftermath. The aftermath that contends with not only the written narratives, but something else Beata would also have spoken about, that Canisia hinted at, is also the photographed visual narratives of Blackness and what that means. And I'm thinking of Kaiama now, who does this very active reckoning with the language and the intimate relationship that she's developed with texts in order to develop a language and an understanding of them to convey to us in all their complexities. I'd like to leave you all to think about who is not here in this room, that we can begin to think of in terms of the solidarities that we claim, the alliances that we should be having, whether it's people who, the connections of stories that we share with people who are indigenous or queer, trans, Palestinians, for me. How do we connect with that? What are the aftermaths that we share, and what's the language that we can all use to begin to reckon with that? I will end it there. Thank you all for your attention, for your presence. Thank you to each of you. Thank you.